Hi everyone, Sean Waldman with Secure Cyber Defense, and this is your bi-weekly video cybersecurity update. Well, we'll get right to it and talk about vulnerabilities. The first up is Mozilla Firefox has experienced some vulnerabilities which they've patched, as well as Google Chrome. Google Chrome has went through multiple updates over the last few weeks, one of them being a more critical update that was exploitable in the wild. And just so you know, when we talk about things being exploited in the wild, what that means is that the cyber intelligence community has actually watched a vulnerability be exploited. So usually when we're talking about vulnerabilities that were disclosed and that there's a patch available versus vulnerability disclosed, which is active in the wild. So typically the ones that are active in the wild start to get a higher severity rating. And those are the ones that typically we push out pretty quickly to make sure that the community is aware of what's being exploited actively versus where there is an exploit, but nobody's really attacked it yet. So just wanted to clarify what in the wild meant. So if you're using Google Chrome, just make sure that you're on the most latest version. And then after we started production of this show on Tuesday, additional vulnerabilities were released. Fixes for Adobe and Apple. So if you're using any of those products, just make sure that for your Apple products, make sure that you're visiting the Apple Store to make sure you've got the right updates. And then from a patching standpoint, I just wanted to talk about patching real quick. So if you're an organization that is patching outside of monthly, you're putting yourself at pretty severe risk. I was talking with an organization yesterday that has an extremely aggressive patch policy, and they do that for security reasons. And they do their best to support the applications that they're over, but at the end of the day, security is paramount, and security trumps everything else. So I would just encourage you to take that stance and be aggressive with your patching capabilities. I would be really careful with using things like WSUS, which is the built-in Windows updating function. Historically, there's been issues with WSUS, and it requires quite a bit of care to make sure that, one, it's being set up properly, you've got the GPOs created, and then the other thing is your third-party patching. So don't ever forget about your third-party patches. I know we've talked about it on this show before, but Ninite is a software package that's available. I believe they have various pieces of it are free. So if you go to NINITE, that will get you to a company that can do some third-party patching. So just make sure you're staying on top of patching. If you can stay current on patches, you're well on your way to reducing your risk. So from a cyber news perspective, there's been a lot in the news. Number one is APIs. It's funny because we had one of our customers actually reached out to us and said, hey, can you cover APIs? And then when our communications department sent me the list of topics available for the week, APIs was on it, which was weird. So actually APIs are a good point, right? So there was, the article said that something like 80% of web traffic is APIs, which is amazing, right? So an API is an application interface. So an API is a way for databases to talk to each other, web applications to talk to each other. You could subscribe to a website for a service, and then if it's got a REST API, from a programming standpoint, you could interact with the data that's in that website on the back end and then feed other databases. And it's great to utilize APIs. APIs are very they open up the ability for you to use data. Typically, they're free to use, and they're included in most web application products. However, I think there are some dangers to APIs. Number one, I think API sprawl, right, is probably one of the first things I think about, where maybe you lose control over documenting the APIs. Where are they? What's being used? Maybe being able to lock the APIs if it's an internal application and you're using it. Maybe coding into the API that only certain applications externally can use that API. So I guess practicing some just general hygiene. I said the documentation word, and one of the topics one of the sessions that I want to cover in deeper is something that I've called the Chief Documentation Officer. And it's something that will resonate a lot. The top two critical controls are know your hardware, know your software, and that's documentation. So on the API topic, just make sure that you're aware of what APIs are being used and what has access to it. Are they using tokens or certificates? And just making sure that you've taken an inventory to make sure that you know what's being used and how it's being used. The second thing is someone tried to poison a water system in Florida. So this is really big news, and I did a lot of research on this yesterday. Number one, there's an American Water Act that the EPA has, which requires municipalities that serve under 50,000 residents to actually, by June of 2021, to have a risk assessment done against their infrastructure. The interesting part about, I'll talk about I think it was Pinellas County. I'll talk about that here in just a second. But the interesting thing about this is that there are no requirements inside critical infrastructure where they have to be reported. Now, I don't want to scare people, right? But I think awareness is key. These types of things can and probably do happen more often than we'd probably want to admit or probably want to believe that these types of things happen. The thing about the Pinellas County that we've been able to find out so far is, number one, it used something, so the systems that take care of water systems, power and sewer and those types of things are called Industrial Control Systems, or ICS. They're connected to systems called SCADA, which is a protocol, and they're protected systems, and they're not supposed to be protected or connected to the internet. And unfortunately, some of these systems end up being connected to the internet in order for people that are specialized, that know how to support this equipment, because there aren't a lot of people that know how to take care of industrial control systems and SCADA networks. So these systems get open to the outside. In this particular case, in Pinellas County, this was a Windows 7 machine which went out of life a year ago. Windows 7 was retired in January of 2020. It also, access was obtained via TeamViewer. And for the most part, TeamViewer has went for quite a long time. We don't hear about TeamViewer vulnerabilities very much because it's a pretty secure application. The only problem with TeamViewer is that it's only protected by a password. So in this case, it was a simple password. Somehow the attacker got the ability to found out the password and was able to gain access. At 8 o'clock in the morning on, I think it was February 5th, the attacker took control and learned that the credentials worked. And the operator noticed the mouse moving at about 8 o'clock, but then it stopped. And later in the afternoon, around 1 o'clock, likely the attacker had some recon to do, so he needed to look at what command and control system he was looking for. There's a human interface software that's usually where they can open valves and those types of things. In this case, the attacker came back at 1, moved the mouse, and changed the sodium hydroxide value, which is lye, which is used to control it's used in the reclamation process of making drinking water drinkable. And they increase it from, I think it was like 10 parts per million to like 11,000 parts per million. Unfortunately, or fortunately actually, nothing happened. Unfortunately, we don't have any information about where the attacker was coming from. That type of information doesn't exist yet. But it's my understanding that because of just how the nature of a command and control system functions, that type of, it's not real time. So it's not like if you would get access to that system and change the sodium hydroxide value as you're increasing it, like on the other side, the sodium hydroxide is like being dripped into the water. It's not real time. So number one, the value was too extreme. I guess there's physics involved with chemical calculations and being able to formulate how it would enter from one value to an extreme value and change that chemical composition. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is apparently there are counter controls in place where operators would have to approve a change like that. So If you're an operator of a city and you've got a water system or a electrical power system or something under your purview, please reach out to a cybersecurity focused firm or a firm that has the ability to protect against industrial controls. Number one, make sure that you're getting your risk assessments done in accordance with the Water Act if it's a water system. And then, things have to be put in place. If you're going to operate out of cycle operating systems, if you have to, maybe you run a manufacturing plant and you've got to run a Windows 7 or heck, a Windows XP machine. We've run into that. If you need to run those types of machines, there are ways to protect those devices using things like EDR softwares in order to make sure EDR software, I said softwares because there are multiple versions of types of EDR. So using an EDR system to isolate a machine and protect it, and then also, auditing externally available remote control software. So a TeamViewer, a LogMeIn, taking that type of inventory on your network to understand that it's being used and that it's being used for a business purpose, and then making sure that that application is locked down appropriately. Wow, I beat that one to death. But it's a big deal, right? I mean, the only reason we found about Pinellas County was because the sheriff of Pinellas County decided to have a press conference about it. If he wouldn't have had a press conference, no one would have found out about it. So it's very important that as scary as they are, because the cybersecurity community and folks like ourselves need to use that opportunity to learn so that we can better protect and launch countermeasures for other customers and know how something occurred so that we can get better at it. And then the last thing I had today was Office 365 announced, interesting enough, that they're going to start alerting on nation states. Now we're checking into this a little bit, but what Microsoft is saying is if you've got an Office 365 account, what we don't know is what version. We're thinking it's E3 or E5. I haven't got clarification on that yet. But apparently in the admin console, if they notice that your tenant is being attacked by a nation state, they're going to alert you about it. We just went through an effort about a week or so ago with an organization with a business email compromise. And what I'd like to do at some point is spend some time with you all explaining what a business email compromise is and how that works and how to protect yourself. What we're finding is that a lot of Office 365 environments are just wide open for attack. So before I jump on another soapbox, and I'll end the video this way, just please make sure that you're implementing multi-factor controls as much as you possibly can. If you've got an Office 365 environment that you manage, at minimum, make sure that the admin tenant accounts have multi-factor, but as soon as you possibly can, please roll multi-factor out to all of your organization in Office 365, and then also take advantage of multi-factor or two-factor authentication on other applications, even web applications like LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram. Protect yourself. If you're using LastPass, if you're using 1Password, all those web-based, Passportal, DashPass, I mean, all those web-enabled places that you can keep passwords, please make sure that you've enabled multi-factor authentication. That's all we have for this week. I appreciate your time. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you in a couple weeks.